and entered. By means of thin spaces between the braids of matting, the place was open to the air, but not to view. There was also a round opening on one side, only large enough, however, to admit the arm, but this aperture was partially closed from within. In front, a deep-dyed rug of osiers, covering the entranceway, was intricately laced to the standing part of the tent. As I divided this lacing with my cutlass, there arose an outburst of voices from the islanders, and they covered their faces as the interior was revealed to my gaze. Before me crouched a beautiful girl. Her hands were drooping, and like a saint from a shrine, she looked sadly out from her long, fair hair. A low wail issued from her lips, and she trembled like a sound. There were tears on her cheek, and a rose-colored pearl on her bosom. Did I dream? A snow-white skin, blue firmament eyes, Golconda locks. For an instant spellbound I stood, while with a slow, apprehensive movement, and still gazing fixedly, the captive gathered more closely about her a gauze-like robe. Taking one step within, and partially dropping the curtain of the tent, I so stood as to have both sight and speech of Samoa, who tarried without, while the maiden, crouching in the farther corner of the retreat, was wholly screened from all eyes but mine. Crossing my hands before me, I now stood without speaking. For the soul of me, I could not link this mysterious creature with the tawny strangers. She seemed of another race. So powerful was this impression that unconsciously I addressed her in my own tongue. She started, and bending over, listened intently, as if to the first faint echo of something dimly remembered. Again I spoke. When throwing back her hair, the maiden looked up with a piercing, bewildered gaze. But her eyes soon fell, and bending over once more, she resumed her former attitude. At length she slowly chanted to herself several musical chords, unlike those of the islanders, but though I knew not what they meant, they vaguely seemed familiar. Impatient to learn her story, I now questioned her in Polynesian, but with much earnestness she signed me to address her as before. Soon perceiving, however, that without comprehending the meaning of the words I employed, she seemed merely touched by something pleasing in their sound, I once more addressed her in Polynesian, saying that I was all eagerness to hear her story. After much hesitation she complied, starting with alarm at every sound from without, yet all the while deeply regarding me. Broken as these disclosures were at the time, they are here presented in the form in which they were afterward more fully narrated. So unearthly was the story that at first I little comprehended it, and was almost persuaded that the luckless maiden was some beautiful maniac. She declared herself more than mortal, a maiden from Oroolia, the island of delights, somewhere in the paradisiacal archipelago of the Polynesians. To this isle, while yet an infant, by some mystical power, she had been spirited from Amma, the place of her nativity. Her name was Yilla, and hardly had the waters of Oroolia washed white her olive skin and tinged her hair with gold, when one day, strolling in the woodlands, she was snared in the tendrils of a vine. Drawing her into its bowers, it gently transformed her into one of its blossoms, leaving her conscious soul folded up in the transparent petals. Here hung Yilla in a trance, the world without all tinged with the rosy hue of her prison. At length, when her spirit was about to burst forth in the opening flower, the blossom was snapped from its stem, and borne by a soft wind to the sea, where it fell into the opening valve of a shell, which in good time was cast upon the beach of the island of Amma. In a dream, these events were revealed to Alima the priest, who by a spell, unlocking its pearly casket, took forth the bud, which now showed signs of opening in the reviving air, and bore faint shadowy revealings, as of the dawn behind crimson clouds. Suddenly expanding, the blossom exhaled away in perfumes, floating a rosy mist in the air. Condensing at last, there emerged from this mist the same radiant young Yilla as before, her locks all moist, and a rose-colored pearl on her bosom. Enshrined as a goddess, the wonderful child now tarried in the sacred temple of Apo, buried in a dell never beheld of mortal eyes, save Alima's. Moon after moon passed away, and at last, only 4 days gone by, Alima came to her with a dream, that the spirits of Oroolia had recalled her home by way of Tedaidee, on whose coast gurgled up in the sea an enchanted spring, which streaming over upon the brine, flowed on between blue watery banks, and plunging into a vortex, went round and round, descending into depths unknown. Into this whirlpool Yillah was to descend in a canoe, at last to well up in an inland fountain of Oroolia. End of chapter 43.